In this video, I want to tell you about the history of International Women's Day and explain how March 8th was designated as Women's Day. March 8th is a day to celebrate women's political, cultural, social, and economic achievements. Additionally, it serves as an opportunity for the global community to acknowledge the importance of women's rights and issues such as gender equality and the prevention of violence against women. But what is the story behind this day? The story begins in 1857. That year, female textile workers in a factory in New York, USA, went on strike to protest harsh working conditions and low wages. In an attempt to suppress the protest, the factory owner ordered the guards to lock the workers inside so that other workers, especially the men, wouldn't notice the strike. While the women were trapped inside the factory, an unknown incident caused a fire to break out. Only a few managed to escape, while 129 female workers were burned to death in the fire. More than 50 years passed after this tragedy. At the beginning of the 20th century, women's movements were fighting for rights such as voting and equal pay with men. Women who had suffered from discrimination and violence for centuries were striving to gain their social and political rights. On February 28, 1909, 52 years after the textile factory fire, workers from the same factory held a protest to demand their rights and to commemorate the victims of the fire. This protest marked a new beginning for the women's movement. That year, the Socialist Party of America organized labor strikes and held a memorial for the women who had died in the fire. For the first time, they designated a day as Women's Struggle Day against poor working conditions. From then on, Americans held a National Women's Day event on the last Sunday of February each year. Following this, women's movements in various European and American countries intensified their fights for voting rights, shorter working hours, higher wages, maternity leave, and other rights. A year later, in 1910, Danish socialists held a conference in Copenhagen called the International Women's Workers' Conference. During this event, Clara Zetkin, a leader of the women's movement in Germany, proposed the idea of establishing an annual International Women's Day. Her proposal was approved by 100 women from 17 countries, although no fixed date was chosen at that time. The following year, on March 19, 1911, the first International Women's Day was celebrated in several European countries, including Austria, Germany, Denmark, and Switzerland, with massive demonstrations. More than 1 million people participated in these events, with European women demanding voting rights, leadership positions, and an end to gender discrimination. 3 years later, when no fixed date had yet been assigned to International Women's Day, Germany held its celebration on March 8th. With the start of World War I in 1914, International Women's Day became a global platform for women's movements. They turned it into a day of protest against war and, alongside their other demands, used it to call for global peace. On March 8, 1917, during World War I and on the eve of the Russian Communist Revolution, female textile workers in St. Petersburg. Petersburg began a large-scale demonstration that quickly spread across the city. Their demands included peace, an end to the war, solutions to food shortages, and the overthrow of the Tsarist government. This movement is considered a precursor to the October Revolution, which ultimately led to the fall of the Tsarist regime and the establishment of the Soviet Union. As a result, after the Communist Revolution's victory, March 8th was declared an official holiday in the Soviet Union. Following the Soviet Union's lead, many communist-influenced countries also designated March 8th as Women's Day. Until the 1960s, this day was largely regarded as a communist holiday. In 1967, second-wave feminists who were fighting for women's liberation embraced this day as International Women's Day. Finally, in 1975, the United Nations officially declared March 8th as International Women's Day. The philosophy behind the designation of Women's Day is to honor the extensive struggles for gender equality and the elimination of injustice against women. These efforts have led to significant progress in the status of women in many countries around the world. However, in recent years, the events held on March 8th have started to resemble Mother's Day, or perhaps a bit like Valentine's Day, which has sparked protests from many women's rights activists. They believe that the role of women should not be defined only in terms of romantic relationships or as mothers. They argue that women, as half of society, play a crucial role, and that International Women's Day should still be a day of struggle for women's rights and to highlight their countless achievements in various fields. We all know that even in the most advanced countries, gender discrimination has not been fully eradicated, and injustices persist. New movements like the Me Too movement show that women are still subjected to violence and abuse, and often remain completely defenseless against such harm. Many women around the world are still victims of child marriage, forced marriage, and other forms of oppression. Patriarchal societies still exist, depriving many women and girls of a normal life. We hope for the day when all women worldwide will live in peace and security, receiving their natural rights, and when gender discrimination will be buried forever in the annals of history.